hosts and cybersecurity experts Brian Horning,
Whoa.
Is that playing? Because it's not playing for me.
Not sure what happened.
What happened?
We're live.
We are live.
That's 2 weeks in a row.
We are live, but
Welcome
the
to the
intro is not playing for me anyway. I don't know what's going on there. Technical difficulties, but welcome to the Security Squawk podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Brian Horning with Exact Cybersecurity. We have Reginald Andre with Arc Solvers and Randy Bryan with Tech Rescue. Welcome to another week back in our boxes, guys. Had a great week in Florida. Is that where we were?
Something like that.
Great to see you guys in person last week.
Yeah, we were down in Andre's neck of the woods, man.
That's true.
15 minutes from my house. Appreciate you guys coming to visit.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. It was a good time, and we learned a lot and discussed a lot. We got to do a show live. We got to do a show on stage for our friends at the event. So it was pretty cool. Pretty cool experience all around. But unfortunately, we got business to talk about today, which is more hacks, more stuff happening in the world of cybersecurity that businesses need to be aware of. We have some FTC updates, and we have some interesting charges from the SEC against a specific company who was hacked. And we're going to dive into what the SEC is doing. And this goes to what we've been saying all along this year, which is that executives and people in the C-suite are going to start being charged for cyber attacks. And we're going to talk about that today and what's happening over at SolarWinds and why one of their executives has been charged. And it's never, I guess one of the things is, as I say on the show all the time, like, hey, CFOs, watch out. You never can tell, from the outside who's to blame or who can be charged. It really just depends on where the decisions are being made at. And in this case, as we're going to talk about, we're going to see that the decision's live with a very specific individual in this case, and the feds felt like it was enough to charge this individual, which what we're going to talk about is not uncommon. It can happen in different areas in the C-suite, and we'll talk about, the different scenarios that we've seen where certain decisions are made that lead to CEOs and CFOs and CISOs and technology managers to be charged with things like fraud when investigations conclude. So before we get into all that, remember, fee for the show. We don't annoy you with ads. We don't read ads on the show. So please just help us grow the show by sharing the show. That's the only thing we ask. So it's a pretty simple ask. Go ahead, Randy.
So today's show's brought to you by the people that watch the show.
That's right.
Like the show, share the show, and comment on the show.
That's right. Do something. And that little thing that you do, that little like that you give us will help other people find this, believe it or not. That's how it works. And that's all we're going to say about that because we have a short time frame to get in a bunch of subjects. And guys, I want to start with the hacks, and then we'll get into FTC and SEC if that's cool with you guys.
Sounds good.
But I think the big one, because we don't know much about the second one we're going to talk about, but the big one this week is a claim by Lockbit that has yet to be, I guess, proven as accurate. But Boeing has been claimed by Lockbit, so to speak. And what happened was last Friday on their dark web leak site, Lockbit 3.0 put out a message on their blog that says, we have your files, Boeing, and you have till, I believe, till November 2nd to start negotiating with them before they start leaking out the data that they claim they have stole. It seems right now, based on the reports I have seen, that Boeing is unsure of these claims. They're not sure how this happened, but Lockbit has published on their dark web leak site that they have used a well-known vulnerability to obtain this data. So we'll find out if this is just what some security researchers believe Lockbit is just potentially posturing here because their ransomware group has been, some people believe that they're fading. So this is just an attempt to try to stay alive as a group. Or we're going to find out that there's something legitimate here, and whether or not Boeing wants to engage in negotiations. We've seen things like this before, guys, and I'm going to ask you your opinion on what you're saying above and beyond what I kind of just laid out there. But we've seen this before with like Apple, and Apple didn't cave to these demands, I think on 2 separate occasions, where their supplier or somebody else in the chain got hacked. And I guess the groups that hacked them felt like, oh, well, we have Apple data here, so we can, try to extort Apple as a result. We don't know if that's what's in play here, which absolutely could be in play. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's going on here.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're not like giving any screenshots. Usually you'll be able to, they'll show some type of screenshot showing what type of data.
Well, they will probably starting Thursday. I think they're giving Boeing some time to figure it out. And I would also imagine that whatever they're going to release next onto the dark web leak site has been shared privately with Boeing, assuming that they have reached out and started, at least a negotiation process.
And then I guess one other tidbit here of information. Apparently it's been unpublished, the threat or the taunting or whatever, which is often a sign that they're in negotiations. So they may be in negotiations with Boeing as we speak. So we're going to really need to keep our eye on this, because there's been a ton, because of what we're going to talk about in a minute with SolarWinds and some other things. There has been a ton of basically the criminals getting into extremely, extremely sensitive national priority type businesses like Boeing, or organizations like the Department of Defense, Microsoft. There's been a lot of that over the last year or so. And, this is another potentially huge one, because Boeing, like right now, Boeing's working on Air Force Ones. They've got a little fleet of Air Force Ones they're working on. I just read about that yesterday. So this is not just some, random airline company. This is a company that's involved in producing things that are of strategic interest to the United States. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, 100%. That's news to me that you just shared with me that they've reversed course on their dark web leak site and have taken it down, which you're right. It potentially could be that they're negotiating. It could also be that they are
dipping out.
Maybe some law enforcement officials have been in contact with the group, letting them know that you're barking up the wrong tree here.
Right.
And if you want to feel the wrath of the U.S. government or potentially our military, you might want to take this down. Only time will tell, right, boys?
Right.
You might want to go attack a small business listening to this show instead, right?
Yeah, that's 100% right. We've talked to plenty of people from DHS, from FBI, who clearly, are not beating around the bush when they tell private businesses, if you're small and you're not involved in like government contracting or in the government in any way, the chances of you getting help around things like this are slim to none. So you're going to have to seek, assistance from the private sector. But in the Boeing's case, they will get the full force of the U.S. government and military to help them. So it's kind of like, do you really, really want to mess with these people? So again, and just like we say, it's a cat and mouse game. In my opinion, it's also, a very immature, business, cybercrime business, if that's what you want to call it. And they're figuring things out along the way too, right? So they're going after these bigger targets, trying to figure out, that business model. And you may be right, Andre. This may be a learning lesson to them to stop messing with these companies and, continue to target, small and medium-sized businesses more because it's less risky. So moving right along, talking about less risky targets, it's been reported here that your friends in Dallas County, Randy, are having another issue. And what I have here is that we are basically dealing with a government entity who's been targeted in cyber attacks in the past. And they're essentially, dealing with some kind of cyber event, cyber breach in terms of data. And they're trying to figure out what's happening. That's basically what we have right now, which is kind of crazy. Are you seeing anything else, Randy, other than like vague and ambiguous statements coming from Dallas County, kind of like they don't know what's going on, but something's going on?
Yeah, nothing really clear or concrete. Just that they caught a breach around October 19th. So around, what is that, about 12 days ago. They hired an outside cybersecurity firm to start looking into it. And that's basically all the news. I mean, and even though, we talk about reading between the lines, there's not a lot of between the lines right here. It is a little weird 12 days in that they haven't filed anything official. Do the new laws that are coming out, when do they start? January 1. Do those apply? Any of those apply to state and local governments at all?
What was that?
The laws that are the rules that are going into place January 1. I believe they're SEC laws or rules, but do those apply? Any of those apply to government? About
SEC's December.
Oh, December 1. That's right. That's right.
And that's only publicly traded companies. And
Okay.
no,
Because
there isn't really anything. There isn't really anything that I'm aware of from a compliance or GRC standpoint that is going to impact local governments. It's not going to go down that way. It's just the federal government can only do so much. They can threaten state governments and local governments on federal funds if they don't do certain things, which I can see coming down the pike for sure. Especially with schools, and we're already seeing it with colleges through the FTC safeguard rules, because they collect the financial information for student loans. They're covered under these safeguard rules, and they also take federal funds from Department of Education and other departments, and all of those have language that state if you take these funds, you're going to do certain things around data security. So, unfortunately, the public sector is treated very differently than the private sector when it comes to this stuff. But the public sector also, things are going to come down on them quicker because of the way things are set up, in my opinion, and it's just not happening yet. So, but it will. I mean, it's all happening and simmering in Washington right now. So it's only a matter of time.
One interesting note is this is talking about the Dallas County, but back in May, the city of Dallas was also hit. Right.
So I don't know what the difference is because I'm not familiar with that area. Maybe Randy can share, but I know like Philadelphia County and the city of Philadelphia here are the same thing.
Oh, yeah. It's different in Texas because the counties are really a higher level of government than the cities. So the counties, like the county judge is the highest elected official in that county. And basically, is the leader or the president or whatever you want to call it of that county. And so the city is kind of a part of that. So it's a completely separate city government. The town where I live, the city is the county seat. So you have a county, city hall for the city. But then you also have a big place for the county government as well. So they're two separate governments. They would coordinate together on things, but they are going to be under separate systems and all that jazz, especially in a bigger town like Dallas. Now, maybe out in some rural county that they might all be on the same system, but they're probably a totally separate system in this case.
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot of information other than they're dealing with an incident and we'll see what's happening. Why we wanted to bring it up, because it's A, fresh in the news, B, it's another kind of critical infrastructure target that's been hit or potentially. But that's all we have. So we'll update everybody in the next show on what's actually happening here. But Boeing, Dallas County, many other smaller groups. I know of some colleges, universities, some small towns around the United States that are dealing with ransomware types of attacks right now, or data breaches of some sort. So there's really a lot going on. We can't cover it all in a 30-minute show. So do a Google search on cyber attacks and see what's happening in your area. I mean, literally, it's as simple as that to do. And use a little slider under tools for look for like stories from the last week, and you'll be surprised as to what pops up. So moving right along into what's happening with what I mentioned at the top of the show, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this one because I think it's important, especially for business leaders and everybody who is responsible for running a company. Things are changing, right? Things are changing rapidly when it comes to the perspective of how cybersecurity is handled in a company, and whether or not your handling of cybersecurity practices inside of your company amounts to something that you can be charged criminally for. And we've mentioned it a million times on this show throughout the year, where we said last year, towards the end of the year, we're going to see a lot more executives potentially charged because of their decisions around what to do and what not to do around cybersecurity. And we've seen it just recently with a hospital group where their CFO exited the company. In this case, he wasn't charged. But we know, like I've been to events where state attorney generals have spoken, and they said they're going to use the things like the FTC safeguards to criminally charge people for not doing this stuff correctly. And this is a very, as I said, after the fact thing. Like the one that we're going to talk about today happened a couple years ago. And these things take time to play out. The investigations take time to make sure the facts are all discovered and revealed. And then once they are, there's going to be people that look around at those facts and try to objectively determine, did somebody try to do something that would that maybe make a decision around budgeting, or whether they do something or don't do something, and is that cause for negligence, or during the process of trying to figure things out, and this can happen in a lot of different places, but did somebody hide something? Did somebody conceal something? Did somebody not bring forward information? And we're going to talk about why that could happen, that caused an event. And what we have here today is an article where the SEC has charged SolarWinds CISO with fraud for misleading investors. And it's a pretty big deal, guys, because this is, again, why I say things are changing, because we haven't really seen too many charges against people in charge. And this goes back to what I always say about cybercrime, is that this is one of those crimes where you're a victim, but you could also become somebody who is implicated and charged as a result of it, right? Because, the CISO not only of SolarWinds not only lived through that event, which probably wasn't very fun for him, But then on the back end of it, you know, his decision making and things that he did while in that position, and you don't know where the direction of that was coming from. And that's something I want to get into a little bit here too, right? Sometimes he might have been the guy who was signing the papers, but he may not have been the one who was actually making the decision, right? And he was being told to do one thing or the other by maybe somebody higher up than him. Hopefully the investigation went that far and they were able to figure that out. And this guy's not taking the fall for somebody. But let's kind of get into it and dissect this a little bit, guys, because we're starting to see this happen a lot more. I mean, 2 in the last month where we've seen a C-suite person either lose their job, resign, or be charged criminally for a cyber attack.
Well, so first off, you are innocent until proven guilty. And I will tell you that the CEO and his lawyers, they came out of the gate swinging on this. So they're not just laying back and taking it, because they have really come out. They've made a bunch of statements, you know, saying they're being persecuted. And, you know, you need to think about it, since this was SolarWinds, which SolarWinds made a tool that a lot of people use to manage their networks. A lot of big companies, a lot of government, Microsoft. This one thing went all over. But when I hear him saying one thing to the shareholders, but then I hear him saying something else internally. And, you know, I'm not a lawyer, okay? And I'm not the SEC, but it doesn't seem like he's lying to the shareholders. Just he's not all gloom and doom, but he's more cracking the whip internally, like, we got to fix this. I could be totally wrong here. That's kind of the impression that I get here. I don't know that this case is going to just be cut and dried and it's going to just end with a guilty. Well, I guess we'll see, though.
I mean, he's quoted as saying that the current state of security leaves us in a very vulnerable state for critical assets.
I mean,
and if you got SolarWinds money, that can be addressed.
But like, what if you just did a vulnerability test and you're saying to the company, hey, we found this, blah, 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 begin quote, we really need to fix it because we're super vulnerable, end quote. So we're going to get started on it today. You know what I mean? Like, it could be pulled out of context.
But then it takes 5 years to actually get everything to where we need it to be.
I mean, I'm thinking the play for the government, like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I think the play for the government needs to be their code review, because ultimately, from what I've read about this hack, it came down to code review, and code was inserted most likely onto a programmer's computer that gave them that back door, and that didn't raise flags somewhere along the way. Hey, this code was added. Who added it? Why was it added? I mean, obviously, I'm putting that in layman's terms, but y'all know what I'm saying. That might be a good play for the government if that's truly how this backdoor was put in when there wasn't good code review.
Yeah. Another quote from the employee saying that basically someone can come and do whatever they want without detecting it until it's too late, which can lead to major reputation and financial loss. So you have staff telling you this as well.
I mean, you're not wrong, and I'm not really defending them so much as saying I don't think it's going to be as easy as it sounds, but you know, that does sound pretty damning what you just read.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, because if you know, I know situations where there's, you know, and that's why I mentioned, is it really this CISO's fault, or was he just following the direction of somebody else, right? If he's coming to the company, he's saying there's vulnerabilities, and we heard, Randy, we heard the same thing at Rackspace, that their engineers were saying like, hey, we got to do something about this. And it just fell on deaf ears because they felt like it wasn't worth the investment to deal with it. And then they had a problem. And I don't see a lot of differences here, but I also don't have all the details in front of me to say, you know, whether this guy was at fault here or maybe he had help. But I see it all the time where there's people in the C-suite who want to do the right thing, but and this is why the SEC rules that are coming in December are written the way they are, because without them, it gives CEOs and CFOs and people on that side of the decision making kind of like a green light to bury their head in the sand, right? As long as we don't know about it, we can't be held responsible, right? So don't tell me anything. We don't want to know, what our risk is, because if we do, then we have to do something about it. So if we don't know, we're good. And that's the thought process right now. But as we said, things are changing. These SEC rules are in effect for a reason, because they know what's happening in boardrooms and in C-suites. And in 2024, things are going to change, and they're going to change quick.
Well, their stock price is down 70% over the last 5 years.
Yeah, who else's stock price is down? MGM's. So, we'll see.
Well, real quick, Brian, we talked about that last week, and Cindy brought it up, that there's no generational memory of attacks. There's so many little things that you don't realize are going to happen. And Andre just brought up an amazing point. Stock prices. People never think about that. And that's part of why the SEC is getting involved, because stocks matter. Stocks are people's retirement funds. Stocks are people's investments. But anyway, that was a great point Cindy brought up last week. We discussed it last week. And this is one of the things that we need to all keep in mind. When you have one of these, your stock price is going to go down. And that's basically your loss of reputation is what it really.
I've been saying for years, it's also like this cyber crime has such a ripple effect on the economy. And that's what you're saying here, right? Like you're pointing out the one side of it where this is going to impact stock prices, which potentially could be lower. So if you're invested in those stocks in your portfolio, you have less money. But on the other side, companies will have to spend more, right? Companies still are not spending enough on cybersecurity, which means they're going to have to figure out a way to pay for this stuff. It's not going to be free, and it's not going to just come out of thin air that they miraculously have money for cybersecurity, which means they're going to have to raise prices, which is going to cause inflation, right? So, and I still don't think we've seen the full cost of cybersecurity and cybercrime hit the books of businesses, which means it hasn't been passed down to the consumer yet. We're still many, many years away from the full, wrath of what that's going to look like for companies, along with rising costs for everything else. But this to me, I look at cyber, anything related to cyber security as a massive, accelerant to inflation. So, all right. So last thing, we got to wrap up here in about a minute or two. So Andre, can you speak quickly on what the little nuance is to the FTC safeguard rule that they're adding today?
Yeah. So FTC safeguard rule, which is the government agency that protects us, the consumers, they're making a change that says mandating that all non-banking financial institutions report data breaches within 30 days. And another kicker is that it applies to any security incident that impacts 500 or more consumers. So I think that's going to be something great for us consumers, because now if there is something that happens, there's no more, people just trying to put it under the rug. And also it kind of calls out these companies that, there was a breach and they're not doing things right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's exactly the same spirit of the SEC rules that we saw go into effect. Obviously, those companies have 4 days, not 30, but rightfully so. They're publicly traded, and their stock prices could be severely impacted by whatever is going on. Not that that's not the case for private companies as well, but they have a little bit more leeway. But I think over time, they'll start to kind of carve out sectors in that rule where certain people are going to have to do things a little bit quicker than 30 days. Again, the writing's on the wall, folks. And I think the big takeaway for me out of all this is the rules aren't going away. The restrictions aren't going away. The requirements aren't going away. Everything that you have to do around cybersecurity is only going to get more stringent. And quite frankly, the days of you doing nothing are over. Like they're done, they're gone.
You're right. And it's crazy because thinking back like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, or even 3, some of the incidents that we discussed on this show, and we looked at when they went to court and people, saying they didn't see anything. Nobody told me. I didn't know. Like all that stuff has really forced these rules where companies kept things from people. They kept things, they had plausible deniability or whatever. And it's crazy how you can just see it coming. If you think back over time, they have forced these rules. So you're right. They're going to percolate down everywhere. It's just a matter of time.
One thing I've learned just watching all of this unfold over the last several years is that I'll give our government regulators at least one thing. They're very good at taking lessons learned and then implementing rules, right? That prevent bad behavior, so to speak, on the part of corporations. So, let this be your warning to all small and medium-sized businesses out there who think they're too small to be hacked. I've had several conversations in the last week where that's come up, that companies still have this belief that they're too small and nobody wants anything. But the reality of it is when you're down, you can't work, you can't produce, you can't even use your computers. So you still have to pay your employees for them showing up for work every day. So if you're down for a week, that's a whole week of payroll that you have to pay out that you're not going to get back, and you're not going to be able to bill out customers. So if you start to add that up over 1 week and 2 weeks, and what I'm saying here is not unrealistic. 2-3 weeks of being down is not unrealistic, where you're going to have to foot payroll with basically no income. So it really puts a hurt on cash flow real quick. But when you think about like, why would somebody want to come after me? They don't care. They'll figure out who you are after the ransomware has already been deployed, right? So good comment there from Cindy, our friend. Any security incident impacting consumers, that is great news for regular people that need to protect themselves. That is correct. And that's another thing that our FTC and our government does fairly well is make sure that consumers are protected from the behavior of business, right? So anything you guys go ahead. What's that?
It may take 5 years for them to actually, come around to doing it, but yes.
Yeah, I mean that's why we have a show, because we get to watch all this unfold in front of our eyes, and it's like a slow motion movie to us. You know what I mean? So, all right, guys, thank you. We are good for today. Any last parting thoughts before I click the leave studio button? All good.
We didn't have any spooky stories, right?
Well, I don't know. Boeing could turn out to be pretty spooky depending on what they have. So we'll see. Hope everyone has a good Halloween. Stay safe out there. We'll see everybody next week. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.